I'm now pleased to introduce Jarrett Walker to the stage to deliver our keynote for this evening. Jarrett is an international consultant, that was also by design, is an international consultant in public transit network design and policy. He has been a full-time consultant since 1991 and has led numerous major planning projects in North America, Aussie, and New Zealand. He is president at Jarrett Walker and Associates based in Portland, Oregon, and principal consultant with M.R. Cagney in Australia. He is the author of the popular public transit blog, humantransit.org, and the book Human Transit, How Clearer Thinking About Public Transit Can Enrich Our Communities and Our Lives. This book is a friendly, non-technical introduction to transit's underlying geometry and the real value judgments that must be explored to make both transit and development policy. His background integrates an arts and humanities PhD with long technical experience in all aspects of transit and its role in city building. He is a frequent keynote speaker, teacher, and facilitator of decision-making processes. Please welcome Jarrett to the stage.
Thank you very much, Eddie, Kia ora, and delighted to be back in Auckland, in this marvelous city that is changing, but changing in ways that make it still recognizably a New Zealand city and not just any other world city. And I'm excited to have been a part of that in the role I played back in 2012 in laying out the framework of your new bus network that has now come on and is starting to happen. Eddie mentioned my book. The book is for sale out there in the lobby. Feel free to help yourself. Transport planning as freedom planning. What do I mean by freedom? Well, I believe that whatever freedom is, we're going to encounter it by first facing reality. So let's talk about reality for a second. How many adult elephants would fit in a wine glass? Notice the sensation of the kind of certainty that you feel when I ask that question. That sensation is called axiomatic or geometric certainty. You are really sure about how many elephants will fit in a wine glass. So sure that I bet you don't even need data. I bet you don't actually need to take some wine glasses to the zoo and do this experiment to know the answer to this question. So now, let's talk about the future, the exciting future that we're all supposed to imagine. In 2050, how many adult elephants will fit in a wine glass? I bet you know the answer to that too, don't you? That's because to know that you know something geometrically is to know that it will be true in the future. In other words, there is a kind of knowledge that we can use to make predictions. And who doesn't want predictions? People are calling me up, journalists are calling me up all the time, asking me to tell them what the future will be like, what the smart city will be like, what our cities will be like in 2030. And I don't know a lot of elements of that answer, but I figured out over time that I know more than you might think simply by the fact that I know about elephants and wine glasses. And a lot of the problems we face in our city are problems of that kind. Specifically, they're problems about space. What is a city? A city is a place where people live close together, which means it is a place without, which means a city is a place without much space per person, which means a city is a place where space has to be shared. That's what a city is. And the problem of sharing space is just the foundation of what we have to do together to make a city. And the way we share space determines whether we are making a city that is inclusive or a city that is only for certain people. So you've all seen these images. An organization called We Write Australia staged these images about how much space 60 people take if they're on a bus in the context of an urban street, and how much space is left over for all kinds of other things if they do that. Here's how much space they take if they're all on bicycles or scooters. Human body-sized vehicles, essentially, that enable us to travel faster than walking without taking much more space than we do. otherwise. And then, of course, there's the image of how much space those same people take if they're in private cars and how little room there is for anything else. Now, of course, it's time to talk about the exciting new technologies that are coming to transform our cities. So here's what it will look like when everyone is in Uber. And then, once we have driverless cars, it'll look like this. But that will actually be even worse because of a phenomenon that the economists call induced demand, which is a great way to make yourself sound smart if you know the term induced demand. But it's really something I need everybody to understand, and it's better to understand that we're talking about biology. If you make a desirable thing easier to do, people will do it more. In other words, if you remove hassles and difficulties associated with driving, people will drive more. This is not economics, this is biology. In fact, it's very close to axiomatic biology. If you think about what an organism is, any living thing has to get some sort of resource out of its environment. And it has to spend less effort getting that resource than it gets back in energy from that resource. That's the basic math of how you keep living, right? And that's all induced demand is. It's the observation that an organism will tend to do things the easy way. And so if something becomes easier, if, for example, using your personal car becomes easier because we remove the hassle and danger of driving, people will do it more. We already have an induced demand effect happening just with Uber because, of course, that too has removed the hassle factor of driving. And in large cities that have really been taken over by Uber and in the context of failing to invest in public transport, we're seeing explosive growths in intercity traffic congestion that's really strangling everybody's opportunity to go anywhere and do things. So only two things ultimately fit in limited space. One is for us to share the ride in large vehicles. The other is for us to use small vehicles that are about the size of our bodies. Nothing else scales to the dense city that you ultimately want to be. So now let me ask you a completely different question. Do human beings value freedom or opportunity? When I gave this talk in Australia, someone came up to me afterward and said, "You really shouldn't use the word freedom in Australia. It sounds American." And that's fine. So I'm going to invite you to think for yourself about what word you want. But what I'm talking about is the sense that when you go out the door in the morning, there are choices before you. There are different things you can do, and that even if there are rituals and responsibilities in your day, you get to make lots of choices. And that in the bigger period, there are choices in how you will live your life, choices in what job you will compete for, what school you will go to, who you want to meet, where you want to hang out, what you want to do, and that those choices exist for you. That's what I mean by freedom, and what I mean particularly by the physical dimension of freedom. All those things that you can't really do on the internet. And if you believe that human beings value freedom and opportunity, I'll ask you, in 2050, will human beings value freedom and opportunity? And now what I'm inviting you to notice is that, again, this sounds like psychology, this sounds like culture, but it's not. It's basic biology. Because an animal, a successful animal of any kind, needs to move. Needs to be able to move out into its world, needs to be able to pursue desired things, avoid dangers, needs to be able to move fundamentally. And that's all we're talking about when I talk about physical freedom. By physical freedom, I mean all of your ability to go out into the world and do things and choose among things. And we can visualize this by drawing a map around the wall around your life. So this is a visualization my firm did. We're doing a redesign of the bus network in Dublin, Ireland right now, a similar project to what we did in Auckland. And we now draw these images. For a hypothetical woman named Jane, who happens to be located near this Dublin City University, this blob shows where she could be in 45 minutes on public transport plus walking. My engineering friends might call this a transit shed or an isochrone. I prefer to call it a map of the wall around her life. Because if she can't get there in 45 minutes, it's not a thing she can make a daily part of her life. Be outside of this wall are jobs she can't hold, schools she can't go to, clubs and organizations she can't belong to, people she will never meet, quite possibly a person she will never marry, because again, there's only so much of this you can do on the internet, and because that just wasn't available. It was outside of the wall. Now, I want you to be aware that in our daily lives we have this wall around us, and that wall is essentially the limits of how far we could get to in the amount of time we have to do something. So it's about 45 minutes if you're talking about a daily activity like work or school. It's further out if you're talking about a weekly activity, but it's closer in if you're talking about something you have to do quickly, like go to lunch or errands. But that wall is there. And so what did we do with our network plan? We proposed to change that to this. And we can talk about exactly how it changed. That Jane, under the new network, can get to 43% more jobs. You can also turn this around. 68% more people can get to her if she's a destination, like the university. I'm not talking about transport anymore. I'm talking about the quality of people's lives, and particularly I'm talking about people's ability to choose things in their lives and therefore have better lives because they had more choices. So freedom is a thing every organism needs. It's a geometric thing that we can predict. This is very important. This is why it brings us back to elephants and wine glasses. I am absolutely sure of that calculation. It's not a calculation that's about Jane's psychology. It's not a prediction of what she will do. It's not, so much of what we do in transport is talk about the psychological or cultural and behavioral aspects of transport. We try to predict what people will do. And I propose something else, which is that independent of our predictions of what people will do, it's a good thing that people can do things. And that's what freedom is measuring. It's measuring that you had choices, which is a good thing regardless of what you chose. Now, this is taking us a little bit away from what we often have in this part of the world, which is a tendency to think about transport in business metaphors. And from a business perspective, of course, the idea of the customer having choices is not useful at all. What you want is to predict what the customer will do, influence what the customer will do. And so this requires thinking about freedom in this way, caring about freedom this way, requires that we step back from that and say, wait a minute, no. As citizens, as humans, as people in the city, we are entitled to a degree of autonomy. We are entitled to choose when we will be customers. We are entitled to make choices. And the city ought to care that we have choices, not just that we choose something. Freedom, I contend, is also inside of a lot of other things we care about and that people tend to talk about in different languages as though they don't agree with each other deep down. So think about long-term real estate value. The current belief is that if you want long-term real estate value from public transport, you have to have tram tracks in the street outside of the building. And that it doesn't maybe matter all that much where the tram goes. The important thing is that there are tram tracks and there's a tram going by, and therefore you can take photographs of the tram going by the building. Now, there are lots of good reasons to build trams if you're trying to maximize freedom, but this is something different. Because once you decide that the important thing about your development is having tram tracks outside, then you're likely to build a useless tram because the usefulness of the tram wasn't that important. The important thing was to have a tram. And I've been in plenty of those conversations, watched those things happen. We have a fairly useless tram in my home city of Portland. The tourists love it. It's great. It's nice. It's not a thing you use if you're going anywhere with any kind of time value. We have the joke that it's easy to photograph the tram in front of the building you're trying to sell because it usually isn't moving. But what if long-term real estate value really lay in, if you are here, what could you do? What if it were not just about, is there a symbol of public transport like tram tracks in the street? What if it were about the sum total of where you could go if you were at this location? I suspect in the long term it is, because in the long term people figure this out. And that in the long term, you're going to see real estate value increasingly converge around actual places where you can go lots of places on public transport, even if there aren't actually rails there. General prosperity, Social inclusion, much of what we talk about on the social side of transport is in fact isolation, entrappedness, the need to move out into the world so that you have choices. Now, I know the way I know about elephants and wine glasses, that the way to do this with public transport is fixed route networks. And that the key thing about fixed route networks is that you have to use whatever technology is right in each situation, but then make them all work together to create grids or other kinds of network structures that work well. The key thing about fixed route networks is that they use scarce space efficiently because they're an efficient way to get people onto big vehicles. The rigidity of the line is what gives you flexibility. This is very important. A lot of my millennial tech friends are out there saying that the only reason we have rigid fixed routes, rigid bus routes, is that old fogies like me just have rigid minds. And that now these kids have come along and have liberated us from old fogies like me, and now everything will be flexible. And now you'll just call up and a vehicle will come to you whenever you need it. It is actually the rigidity of the fixed route that makes your life so liberated. It is your certainty that that vehicle is coming at that point, at that time, when you need it, regardless of whether you called it, regardless of who else called it, regardless of whatever else may be happening, that makes public transport so liberating. If you've lived in a city with a big metro system, you know what I mean. It is precisely that the station is where it was yesterday that makes you so confident in moving out into the world. Nothing that can possibly happen demand responsively is ever going to come close to the efficiency of great fixed route services, bus and rail, that are designed to succeed. They are at completely different orders of magnitude. And as a result, public transport, the fixed route, can scale in a way that little vans are not going to scale, at least not prior to automation, because as long as we have a driver in every van, that's an enormous cost. That is never really going to make sense. And even once we have automation, supposing that we do, we will still have the problem of space. It will still be the case that the big vehicle uses space efficiently and the little vehicle does not. What's the core of how we create these networks? Of what do I do when I'm trying to create freedom? Well, before I got to the point of visualizing freedom, long, long ago, I coined the slogan, "Frequency is freedom," because of all the elements of public transport, frequency is the single most important one for expanding that blob of freedom, moving the wall around your life outward so that you can do more things. And it's also one that I constantly have to explain, because if you are a motorist, and most decision makers in our cities are themselves motorists, you don't have a concept of frequency. You have a concept of speed, you have a concept of nice vehicles, you may have a concept of reliability, and so when you come to public transport, you'll want to talk about those things, but you don't have a concept of frequency, because that experience of you cannot go until a vehicle comes is not really your experience as a motorist. So I have to pound away at it. I have to emphasize that frequency is a cubed value. It does three different cool things: less waiting, easier connections, which is what combines routes together into a network, and a backstop for reliability. And it's because of that that we get this nonlinear payoff by actually investing in it. It's really expensive, but it's really worth the investment. And we see that all over the world. So hey, Auckland, that's what your bus network used to look like. Red on all of the maps I draw is high-frequency service, turn up and go every 15 minutes or better all day, and that's what it used to look like, and that is more or less what it looks like now. Before, after, before, after. Remarkably little money had to be put into it in order. It was not really that much of an expansion of the service. It was just a reallocation and a reorganization of one of the most inefficient public transport networks I had ever seen, and I had seen a lot of them. It's working. Patronage is growing somewhere around 6, 7, 8% year over year in all the different sub-areas. This is a spectacular success story. And remember, too, the measure of a fixed route network is not how many people ride in the first couple of years. This is a great start. What really starts to happen is that the frequent network needs to go out there and be an idea in the city that helps people organize their decisions about where to locate and how to arrange their lives. So, because frequency is invisible, because you can't take a picture of it, One of the strongest responsibilities of Auckland Transport, of anyone making decisions or thinking about public transport, is to draw a map of this frequent network, make it really visible, help people talk about it. You want to pick up real estate ads and see apartment listings saying on frequent bus, so that people, then that's how you know that people who value public transport are locating themselves where it will work for them. The public transport line comes to be lined by people who appreciate it. What could be better? That's actually how we get there. And so we have a lot of great examples of that, of cities that have gone a long way with that. Toronto, Minneapolis, Brisbane is the only one. Vancouver actually built a regional goal around the percentage of population on the frequent network. They've already achieved that. Remember that frequent buses are a key to affordability. I'm not expressing an opinion about your light rail projects here, but rail is always going to drive up housing prices rather steeply because it's always going to be scarce. Bus services can go so many places so quickly if you design for them that they can't possibly drive up real estate prices as high everywhere, and as a result, the best way to maximize affordability and freedom is usually to locate on a frequent bus route, not necessarily on a rail station, because you're likely to be able to afford life on a frequent bus route. So that's why the nexus with development is so important. Here is a street near my house that is a frequent bus route. It does not have a tram. It's not going to have a tram. It has a good frequent bus service, and that's what we've done with it. One of the key ways we did this, very nearly zero requirements for off-street parking. We want units to be affordable. We're having a crisis of affordability, and so we're doing everything we can to make things cheap. And the key thing to make things cheap is to help people not have to own cars and to make it cheaper for them to live without cars. And so getting rid of on-street parking has been crucial to being able to deliver this kind of density. So this is my last slide, and I want to just come back and bring it back to the big picture for a second. Once I started looking at this diagram, once I started looking at this image for the first time, the wall around my life and what I could do to expand it so that I would be freer, I realized that this is really the frame in which you have to analyze every other opinion about public transport that you're going to hear. Because when someone says that something else is important about public transport, they are saying that this is less important. They are saying that you should be able to go fewer places so that we can have this other thing that I want. And that's the context of that, of all of those claims. So for example, if someone says buses aren't important, you can tell this tool, I would never ride a bus, and it will show you a vastly reduced freedom. The wall around your life will move inward, right? And you'll have less places you can go. You can say, I won't walk, I won't interchange. I'm used to the buses as they are, leave them as they are. All of those things will bring the freedom inward, give you less choices and options in your life. And so I ask you, I'm not telling you, but I'm asking you, how important is each of those opinions to you compared to the desire to have a city in which people feel that they can go out into their city, make their own choices, find their own happiness, find their own prosperity by having as many options as possible? That's my question. Thanks very much.